Welcome to Confessions of a Parent Coach. I'm Coach, a mother of four, and potty talker, Ann Kaplan. This is the podcast where I confess something from my own parenting and coaching life, teach a lesson around it, and answer your questions. Even we parenting experts are far from perfect, and the real magic happens when we get down with all that imperfection. We get into the gritty side of parenting here, so earbud up and dive in. Welcome into another episode of the podcast, listeners. I am so excited to be here with you again this week. And talking this week, getting back to the gram. We're talking about the Enneagram again this week. And I'm going to talk about something I haven't talked about a ton on the podcast when it comes to the Enneagram, and it's our default coping styles. So if you remember back a long time ago, we've talked about like all 9 types. The Enneagram just loves the rules of 3. There are 9 types. They're divided into 3 triads. There's 3 types in each triad, blah, 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 blah. And there's 3 coping styles, which we're going to talk about. So those 3 triads, head, heart, body. Within each of those 3 triads, there's one type that deals with their core emotions by internalizing them, one that deals by externalizing them, and one that deals by suppressing or repressing them. So we're going to go around the gram today and talk about all of those. And I'm also going to give you specific examples of how that looks in parenting, our default way of dealing with the emotions that our experiences bring up inside of us. We're going to talk about that today. So first, I have to start us off with a confession. So as an Enneagram type 1, I am an internalizer. And so a couple weeks ago, you may have heard me talk about in my confession in a different episode, my inability or my challenge in receiving criticism, especially from my husband. I really don't handle it very well. And that was in the context of me, kind of talking about how I've learned to accept that that's part of who I am and all of those things. But what I didn't talk about, because that wasn't the topic of that episode, is why do I have such a hard time with criticism? And one of the reasons why ones tend to struggle with criticism is because they are so critical of themselves. So a lot of times when we talk about, like if you work with me, one of the things that you get from working with me is a guidebook that I created myself about the Enneagram. And one of the cool things that I love about my guide that I haven't found in many other resources is tips for interacting with someone of each type. So let's say you working with me, you figure out what type your child is, or at least what type they're presenting as in this moment of their life. You're going to get like hands-on tips for like, okay, great. What's the best way to be and present and in a relationship with this type? And with ones, one of the sort of like tips that I get for being in relationships for one or supporting a one is soften criticism. Ones are already self-critical and negative feedback can be excruciating for them. It is super true. So the reason why this is like such a bone of contention in my marriage is partly because of my Enneagram type and partly because of my husband, Mike's Enneagram type. So my Enneagram type is super focused on excellence and integrity. And the way that we try to, achieve that is by being very critical of ourselves and being very rooted in holding ourselves to extremely high standards. So that internalizing of the core emotion in the body type, which what the one is in, is anger. So I internalize my anger. So no matter how, I always say, like, if you're dealing with a one, no matter how much frustration, disappointment, anger, judgment, you see them reflecting outwardly, multiply that by 10, because that's how much they're putting onto themselves first. So however angry I seem with you, I'm twice or 10 times as angry with myself. However frustrated, I seem like I am with you, I'm 10 times as frustrated with myself. I internalize that. So if I'm already, scolding and finger wagging at myself all day long, getting harsh criticism from my husband is something that it's excruciating for me. I really can't handle it. And it's one of the reasons why criticism is a huge bone of contention in our family, or in our marriage, I should say. And Mike is a 2, which means he's an externalizer. He feels this like extreme empathy for everyone around him except himself. He feels sadness for them when they are struggling. And the way that he tries to deal with that externalized sadness that he's projecting onto me as his wife is to criticize me. By giving me this, what he sees as constructive feedback, he's helping me. He's alleviating the sadness he feels for me when he sees me, whatever, doing things that might self-sabotage or something like that. And so he's got this like drive to, help me by giving me constructive feedback, because he has externalized his empathy and sadness onto me. And I have an extreme rejection of his criticism and feedback, because I internalize the anger that I feel at not being perfect onto myself. And extra criticism is just a non-starter for me. You can see how these dynamics can be really challenging, problematic, even some might say. So we're going to talk about, I'm going to go all around the gram with you today, and I'm going to talk about all of the pieces of this internalizing, externalizing, and repressing coping style. And I'm going to talk to you about what it looks like with your kids. So if you're watching me on the video, I'm actually moving my computer closer to me right now, something you listeners will not be able to notice and is totally irrelevant, but it just helps me and my old lady. And even with my reading glasses, I still need to move my computer closer to my face so that I can read my notes smoothly. So, let's first start with why. Why does this matter? Besides it just being fascinating, which, as an Enneagram type 1, I love self-improvement. I love, personal growth and stuff like that. So I love this stuff. It's fun for me. It's super interesting and fascinating, but there's a value in it beyond simply that self-edification. And when we look at it through the lens of parenting, understanding our default mode, like how do we deal with the things that the world kind of throws at us naturally, understanding that is the first step in being able to up-level that. And to me, great parenting is synonymous with up-leveling the way that we engage with our kids. And I hope you agree. If you don't agree, you might be listening to the wrong podcast. So I'm going to just go with the premise that we all agree that one of the huge keys to excellent parenting is examining and improving ourselves. And in order to do that, we need to understand where we're at right now and why. We need to understand what is that default mode. So I love the Enneagram for this reason in so many ways, including the one that we're looking at today, because knowing your type helps you unpack what is your default mode. What is that default mode? And then you can revamp your parenting. I mean, literally almost overnight. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that. So let's start with, I'm going to give you super brief refresher on the triads, and then I'm going to focus in on those 3 coping styles. So starting with the gut triad, the head triad, sometimes it's called the intuition triad. It's that gut. The core emotion in that triad is anger. But it's important to know that whatever your coping style is, you're not just going to use it for your core emotion. You're going to use it for tons of your emotions. Almost all of your emotions. You are going to look at the world through the lens of that coping style. So let's talk about what that means. So let's look at the gut triad really quickly. So, okay, gut triad, core emotion is anger. Well, one type in that triad is going to internalize anger, one is going to externalize anger, and one is going to repress anger. In the gut triad, the externalizer is the 8. The repressor is the 9, and the internalizer is the 1. That's me. That's what I just talked about. So you see where I'm going with that. That gives you just a tiny, so 8s externalize their anger and pretty much everything else that they feel. 9s suppress or repress their anger and pretty much everything else that they feel. And ones internalize their anger and pretty much everything else that they feel. So now you see there you go. That's an example of one of the triads. The next triad we have is the heart triad. That's numbers 2, 3, and 4. Twos, and the core emotion of that triad is shame. It also is sadness or loss, like depending, sometimes grief. Those 4 words pop up in describing the core emotion of that heart triad. So twos are the externalizers, threes are the repressors, and fours are the internalizers. So if you think about that, twos externalize their sadness, threes repress their sadness, and fours internalize their sadness. And then the last triad is the head triad, the thinking triad. And once again, we have the 5, 6, and 7 are the types that are in that triad. Fives externalize their core emotion. So the core emotion of the thinking triad is fear. Sometimes it's worry, sometimes it's anxiety, fear. So fives externalize their fear. Sixes repress their fear, and sevens internalize their fear. So that's like a super quick overview. Let's go back to the gram again. So we've gone around the gram once. We've talked about the triads. We've talked about the core emotion of each triad. And we've talked about how there's one type in each triad that internalizes, another that externalizes, another that represses. Now let's talk about those 3 coping styles. Internalizing. Let's start with that. I say, or actually, I'm even going to start with a broad overview of this before I get into the weeds with you. So all of us, when we're connected with our egos, we see the world as having problems that we need to solve. There's things about our situation or ourselves or whatever that we need to figure out. Internalizers say, I'm the problem. Externalizers say, and we're looking at this through the lens of parenting, externalizers say, my kid is the problem. Repressors or suppressors say, there is no problem. Okay. So that's a really great, like, sort of Cliff's Notes way of seeing these 3 ways of being. Now let's hone in on internalizing. Internalizing means we direct things at ourselves. Like I said, it's I'm the problem. There's something wrong with me. The way internalizers experience the world or perceive the experiences they have is always as a reflection on themselves before they can think about it in terms of the outer world. So it's easy. It's our default mode as internalizers to interpret whatever situation we are in as a reflection of us. No one came to my birthday party. It's got to be because I'm a loser, not because there was a torrential downpour, or I scheduled my birthday party on the same day as the Super Bowl, or there's a COVID epidemic going and everybody is not allowed to hang out with me. It's because of me. There's something about me that is creating the situation that I'm in. So let's talk about that more directly. For ones, they feel that anger and frustration. Ones feel frustration with themselves, and they use self-criticism, directing that self-frustration at themselves. That's their mechanism that helps them not go astray. So that's how a 1 internalizes. 4s, their core emotion is sadness or sorrowfulness. They integrate that emotion as part of their sense of self. 4s have a sense of a flawed self. Fits perfectly with that whole I'm the problem thing, right? Whenever they feel that core emotion of sadness, they integrate it into their sense of self. And then 7s direct their fear of discomfort, pain, lack of freedom, restrictiveness. They direct that fear inwardly. So for a 7, you think about it, the outside world is fun and exciting, and freedom represents freedom, but inside, it's scary in there. We don't want to go internal. We don't want to feel that pain that might be there, that depth of all of the negative emotions that might happen. So sevens, their core emotion is fear. That fear is directed internally. They literally are afraid of their inner world. And so they escape into the outer world with fun distractions and things like that. So that gives you an example of that whole internalizing for each of those three types. Just remember, I'm telling you it in terms of that core emotion, but for example, I'm a one, I'm an internalizer. I don't just internalize frustration, I internalize everything that I feel. Like I said, somebody doesn't come to my birthday party, it's probably because of me. If a client, a potential client comes to a consultation and they don't hire me, my default thinking will be, oh, I must have done something wrong in the consultation, not like, oh, they couldn't afford it, or they found another person that was super exciting to them, or whatever. It's always something about me. So, and also positive emotions, really fun stuff or exciting things. Like if I do get the client, oh, it's because of me. I did something great. I'm a good person. I did the right thing. You see the world as a reflection of yourself, first and foremost. That's what internalizing is. And so when we look at this through the lens of parenting, it's really easy to take the stuff that's going on with our kids personally and make it mean something about us. My kid is struggling at school, it's because I'm a bad mom, for example. I had a session with a client today whose son really misbehaved at church last weekend. And, she was talking to me about, how did she want to respond to his behavior and what would be the best way. And through the course of our conversation, she really understood more and realized more clearly that a big part of the reason why she felt like she wasn't responding to it correctly is because she was embarrassed of how everybody saw her as a mom based on how her kid was feeling. And unless she got some sort of confirmation that she had really, really, really gotten through to him, and that everybody else, the optics of this situation would reveal to her, peers at church that she was a good mom, a responsible mom, to use her words, she wasn't going to feel complete. That whole situation felt like it was a reflection on her. And because she was a one, she had this big focus on responsibility and excellence, and she wanted everybody to see her responding responsibly to her child. So normal. So our natural way of seeing things as internalizers is I'm the problem. And when it comes to parenting, I'm a bad parent. Whatever's going wrong, it's because I'm bad. I did something wrong. Now let's talk about externalizing. So these are eights, twos, and fives are the externalizers. And externalizers, they're the ones in parenting who would say, my kid is the problem. I'm not the problem. My kid is the problem. And in general, eights or externalizers, including eights, direct things at others or at the outside world. So they generally focus on everything and everyone else, everything else but myself, everyone else but myself. And so, for example, eights, their core emotion, because they're in the gut triad, is anger. And they freely express that anger and apply their super strength. Eights have a huge value of strength and resilience. They apply that strength to changing people and situations around them. So as parents, eights can be very controlling sometimes, right? They are externalizing their frustration by putting that anger, frustration, strength, power onto their child. Twos are externalizers also, and they project their sadness outwardly. Like I was talking about with my husband, he feels sad when he sees me self-sabotaging, and he wants to help me. They use helpfulness to address the sadness they feel for others. So, and in Mike's world, criticizing me is helpful. So that's what he's doing right there. And then fives fear the outside world. So whereas sevens fear their inner world, fives fear the outside world. It's a scary place, and their strategy is to be prepared, strategize, make sure they know enough, all of that stuff. So that helps them mitigate their fear for the outside world, to make the outside world less scary. So there's not a whole lot of self-reflection in the default mode of an externalizing person. Now, remember, we're talking about default, just like I'm an internalizer, but I've learned to understand that about myself and remind myself that if a client doesn't hire me, it's not because I'm a terrible person, all those things. Obviously, externalizers can learn to realize, that expression when you point the finger at somebody else, there's three more pointing back at you. They learn to actually embody that expression. And actually, my husband Mike is a really great example of that. But just in general, when it comes to parenting, if our default mode is thinking, okay, this situation is the problem, my kid is the problem, for those kinds of parents, those parenting dilemmas might feel solvable only by changing the situation or changing the other person's behavior. Instead of I'm a bad mom, it's my kid is driving me nuts. Most of us evolved parents, if you're still listening to this podcast, I highly doubt you're the kind of parent who's going to say, my instead of saying I'm a bad mom, say my kid is a bad kid. We don't normally say that stuff, but if we're really unpacking what we're feeling, we kind of are feeling that, right? Like if we're externalizers, it's like, my kid is naughty. My kid is disrespectful. My kid is rude. My kid is lazy. My kid is ignorant. These are all things that clients say to me all the time, and it's very understandable. That's a real clue to me that they are externalizing. The situation is hard for me, and my assumption is it's hard for me because the other person has a flaw, not because I have a flaw. And let me be very clear, neither internalizing nor externalizing is correct. Just as it's not true for me to say no one came to my birthday party because there's something terrible about me, it's also not true to say no one came to my birthday party because all my friends are assholes. Like there's a whole world, and making everything about you or making nothing about you, both of those are not great strategies. But yet we all have a default strategy, and understanding that default gives us a place to work from. Let's move into that sort of repression grouping of coping strategies. So remember, the repressing types are the 9, the 3, and the 6. 9s, remember, they are in the gut triad, so their core emotion is anger. 3s, their core emotion is that sadness because they're in the heart triad, and 6s, their core emotion is fear. Now, what's interesting is if you talk to a 3, 6, or a 9, they almost always will be kind of disconnected from whatever their emotion is. Well, that makes sense. They're repressing. So, for example, I meet a 3 and I say, oh, you probably feel a lot of shame, which I wouldn't actually say that directly to a 3, but let's say I did. 9 times out of 10, that 3 is going to be like, I feel fine. Like emotions get in the way. I put them to the side so that I can keep on keeping on. And I don't know what you're talking about. Deep sadness. Like that's not me, right? The repression coping style is to basically say there is no problem. We are not just directing things like, so for example, internalizers direct things at themselves. Externalizers direct things at others. Repressing types direct things away from awareness entirely. There is no problem. So repression really means disconnecting so that we don't experience something. So let's look at that for each type. 9s, they're called the peacemakers sometimes. 9s turn a blind eye to their own frustration so that they can stay easygoing. 3s set negative emotions aside, including that sadness, so that they don't get in the way on their path to success. A lot of times when I talk to 3s about just put your emotions on the back burner because they will muddy the waters and make things they'll just complicate your path from A to B. Almost always 3s are like, amen, hallelujah. That's the way a 3 thinks often. And 6s avoid their fear. So remember, the core emotion of the thinking triad, which the 6 is in, is fear. 6s avoid their fear by contingency planning and sidestepping threats. So they perceive these threats and then they come up with a plan to repress that threat. It's not a threat anymore. It's like basically to literally be like, there's no problem. I have a plan for everything. Right? So Repressing types are so good at suppressing things. They can often be unaware of how they really feel at all. It could be hard for these, if you're a parent of one of these types, it can be hard to address like deeper family issues. It's more this like kind of it's fine, this too shall pass sort of attitude, which is great until it's not. Right? That's a great strategy to have. And oftentimes, when you're in a relationship with a 9-3 or a 6, their ability to just stay even keeled it's inspirational sometimes. So that's beautiful until it's not, just like all of these skills, right? So going through these types, these coping styles, I hope you're able to like identify yourself in them. If you don't know your type yet, you might still be able to see, oh yeah, I do that. That's typical for me. Also, you might be like, oh, well, I do all three of those things sometimes. Well, of course you do. You're a human being. You're not just like some sort of cog in a wheel or a piece in a puzzle or something like that. We all have those things. And I will say that of all things in the world, parenting seems to be the one that brings out internalization in almost every parent, regardless of what your Enneagram type is. And externalizing. I mean, how many of my clients hire me because they really have this hope, even if it's not a conscious hope, that by hiring me, I will teach them how to change their child's behavior, or change their husband's behavior or their partner's behavior. We all have all of these within us for sure. But I hope you can start to see how understanding your default coping mode starts to demystify these parenting challenges. Like if you find yourself always just like doing that whole finger pointing thing and not noticing the three that are pointing back at you, if you find yourself just being literally thinking like, my kid is this, my kid is that, my kid needs to be this instead of that, all of those things, that is a sign, that there's something there. If you find yourself sort of just being like, I'm not even going to look at this, it's too crazy, it's fine, that might be another sign that you want to look at some stuff. And the same thing with that, like constantly feeling like you're a failure and that you have just completely let your family down, and that the only solution is for you to be a better person. That's another sign. So think about those things. Think about when you're doing those things, and think about all three of these messages. We at least know on the surface, like these are not healthy messages. I'm the problem. My kid is the problem, or there's no problem. For goodness sakes, of course, none of us want to be acting from those vantage points. But yet there's a utility for understanding those vantage points and understanding why we do that. So understanding and demystifying those challenges, that's how we can kind of kickstart a new way of navigating those challenges. So if you feel like you are ready to decode yourself and start to demystify your strategies and what's going on with you, that is what I'm here for. And it all starts in that free discovery call that you hear me talk about every week, whether you just want to learn what your type is, what you want to do with understanding what your type is, or you just want to create a plan for showing up differently with your kid, whether or not it involves the Enneagram. That is what I'm here for. This is what I do with my clients every day. And I cannot wait to see your name pop up on my calendar so that we can chat one-on-one and get me up to speed on everything that you're up against and how you want it to be different and what you need to do to get from here to there. Have a great week, everybody, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye. The episode is over, but there's more waiting for you. You can grab my free workbook, Getting Kids to Listen the First Time, that walks you through the fundamental principles I teach all of my clients and applies them to this very universal parenting challenge. So if you're sick of repeating yourself all day long or just want to learn more about my style, you'll definitely want to go to bit.ly/kidswholisten. And if you're ready to work with me, let's meet. Set up a free call at bit.ly/Kaplan call, and let's create an action plan that gets you exactly where you want to go. And of course, links to all this goodness are in the show notes. Thanks for joining, and I'll see you next time.